Just after dawn, inside a warehouse on the outskirts of Los Angeles, federal agents opened a stack of blue plastic storage bins that looked harmless at first glance. But when the lids came off, the room fell silent. Bundles of 20s, 50s, and 100s, stacked, rubber-banded, and wrapped with the precision of a cartel counting house, spilled across the floor. By the time they finished, the total climbed into the tens of millions, all traced back to a laundering pipeline that stretched from American drug streets to a quiet network of Chinese cash collectors hiding in plain sight. These were not cartel members. They were not traffickers. They were office workers, delivery drivers, small business owners, people who blended effortlessly into daily life across California, Texas, New York, and Illinois. Yet for years, this group silently washed mountains of drug proceeds for dealers, meth rings, fentanyl distributors, and even Mexican cartels. Their operation was so efficient that money moved from a street corner in Chicago to an underground banking pool in Guangdong in less than 12 hours, without a single international wire transfer. And when the case finally reached federal court, the truth stunned even experienced investigators. The defendants pleaded guilty, admitting they had laundered tens of millions through shell companies, phase-structured deposits, and an underground system engineered to outpace American banking laws. But one question remains. How did a small group of Chinese nationals turn America's drug crisis into their own global cash empire? And how much of it is still operating today? The answer begins long before the arrests, with a facade so ordinary that no one questioned it. Before their names appeared in federal indictments, the members of this Chinese money laundering organization seemed indistinguishable from the millions of immigrants building quiet lives across America. At the center of the network was Chen Wei, a 39-year-old who ran a modest import-export business out of a strip mall office in Alhambra, California. To neighbors, he was polite, helpful, and almost invisible, a man who worked long hours, rarely drew attention, and appeared to be focused solely on growing his small company. His business had all the markings of legitimacy: shipping invoices, customs declarations, neatly stacked folders of tax filings, and a website advertising cross-border wholesale services. Clients trusted him. Banks approved his accounts. Even local community organizations welcomed him as a reliable contributor. The illusion worked because, in the beginning, some of it was real. Chen did ship small batches of electronics and household items between the United States and China. He handled genuine payments from small Chinatown retailers. He built a reputation as someone who could move money quickly and efficiently for families supporting relatives overseas. But alongside the legitimate activity, a second operation was forming, quietly, discreetly, and without paperwork. It began when Chen met an acquaintance from Fujian who introduced him to a man known only as the Collector. The pitch was simple. There were people who needed money moved, cash-heavy businesses, importers avoiding delays, no questions asked transfers. Chen said yes, thinking it was harmless. Then, one night, he received his first assignment. A duffel bag dropped at a parking lot behind a supermarket. $86,000 in small bills, rubber-banded, uncounted, and unmistakably the product of street-level drug deals. Chen realized immediately what he had stepped into, but the system absorbed him before he could step back. The money moved quickly. His export company became a perfect front for structuring deposits. A series of acquaintances, nail salon workers, kitchen staff, delivery drivers, were recruited to open personal and business accounts, each depositing amounts under $10,000 to avoid reporting thresholds. Everything looked normal on paper. Nothing appeared suspicious in isolation. Even his early transactions were small enough that compliance teams saw no red flags, and that is why the illusion held for so long. Chen appeared to be an honest businessman navigating two cultures and two economies. His associates looked like everyday workers. The cash seemed to belong to bustling small businesses. But the first fracture in the facade appeared when a bank flagged a deposit that did not match any of Chen's listed commercial partners. A single transfer that made no sense in the context of his declared activity. It was small, it was subtle, but it was the first qian that beneath the clean paperwork and calm exterior, something much darker was moving through the veins of his company. The true engine of the organization, the part invisible to neighbors, bankers, and even many of its own foot soldiers, was a laundering system so efficient that federal agents later described it as a financial conveyor belt built to clean drug money faster than banks could detect it. It started on the streets. Drug crews in Chicago, Phoenix, San Diego, and Philadelphia generated mountains of unbankable cash from meth, fentanyl, heroin, and counterfeit oxycodone. Cartel couriers needed that cash collected quickly, counted quietly, and moved without triggering federal reporting requirements. That is where the Chinese network stepped in. Operatives like Chen Wei coordinated teams of collectors, Chinese nationals or Chinese-speaking immigrants recruited through community networks, gambling circles, and WeChat groups. Their job was simple: meet cartel runners in parking lots, strip malls, or apartment garages, pick up the bags of cash, and hand them off to converters. And these converters, often small business owners or newly arrived workers, fed the money into the banking system through structured deposits, each under $10,000, spread across dozens of personal and business accounts. A single day's worth of deposits could involve 20 people, each making 3 or 4 small drops at different branches to avoid detection. But the brilliance of the system lay not in the collectors or the converters. It lay in the underground banking model that connected them. Once cash entered these accounts, Chen's group didn't wire a single dollar overseas. That would be too risky, too traceable. Instead, they used the Chinese FAE Qian network, which relied on matching pools of money in different countries. When a cartel in Los Angeles needed its funds in Guadalajara or Sinaloa, Chen would deposit the dollars into US-based accounts. Meanwhile, a partner in China or Hong Kong would release the equivalent value from a separate pool to an intermediary connected to cartel brokers, usually in Mexico. No money crossed borders on paper. Yet value moved instantly, invisibly, and outside the financial system, regulators understood. For transactions requiring more secrecy, the group used layered transfers through shell companies posing as importers, wholesalers, logistics firms, and even tutoring centers. Most had no employees, no real operations, and no customers. But they produced invoices, shipping manifests, and tax records, enough to satisfy casual bank reviews. Crypto added a second layer of invisibility. When collectors received unusually large cash drops, they would deposit structured amounts into exchange accounts, convert them into USDT or Bitcoin, run them through mixing services, and then disperse them into dozens of low-volume wallets before sending them back to cartel-linked intermediaries. Investigators later found spreadsheets with columns labeled fast wash, deep clean, and double chain, indicating different laundering paths depending on the source of the money and the urgency of delivery. For victims caught on the fringes of the drug world, the consequences were devastating. One mule recruited from a Chinese restaurant in Houston believed he was helping process payments for a wholesale business. When federal agents raided his apartment, he broke down in tears, insisting he had never touched drugs in his life. And yet his bank account had been used to launder more than $1.4 million in fentanyl proceeds. By then, investigators had already seen enough to understand the scale of the operation. They realized that if this much money could move so quietly, so seamlessly, and so quickly, then the organization must have someone coordinating transfers with the precision of a financial architect. Someone who understood both cartel demands and the blind spots of the American banking system. And as agents dug deeper, they found exactly that. As the operation matured, it stopped resembling a loose collection of cash pickups and small deposits and transformed into a full-scale financial enterprise. By 2020, Chen Wei's network had expanded far beyond Southern California. Federal investigators would later discover that his laundering routes now extended through Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia, creating a nationwide web of collectors, converters, and shell companies that moved millions with industrial efficiency. What made the expansion so effective was the structure. The Chinese organization did not compete with drug crews. They partnered with them. Cartels in Mexico, especially groups linked to the trafficking of meth and fentanyl, learned that Chinese launderers could move their profits faster, cheaper, and with far less exposure than traditional cartel money managers. Instead of smuggling bulk cash across the border or relying on corrupt remittance services, cartels simply handed their money to Chen's collectors in the United States. In return, they received clean funds in Mexico, China, or Hong Kong, often within hours. The margins were enormous. The Chinese network charged between 3% and 8% per transaction, depending on risk, volume, and speed. With weekly cash drops sometimes exceeding $5 million, the profits multiplied quickly. The lifestyle of those at the top shifted accordingly. Although Chen Wei avoided drawing attention, others in the organization flaunted their earnings. One mid-level coordinator in Las Vegas rented penthouse suites, bought luxury watches, and spent nights gambling with cartel brokers. Another associate in New York posted photos of himself driving a Porsche Panamera, captioned with vague references to winning big and new business opportunities. But behind the indulgence was growing sloppiness. As the network expanded, so did the number of people involved. Drivers, depositors, shell company directors, crypto handlers, and low-level assistants who didn't understand the consequences of the operation they were fueling. More transactions meant more eyes on them. Banks in Texas, Illinois, and New Jersey began filing a surge of suspicious activity reports. The patterns were always the same: multiple deposits under $10,000 spread across dozens of accounts, all tied to businesses with inconsistent revenue histories. For a while, the network adapted. They rotated depositors every few months, cycled through new shell companies, and shifted to ever more sophisticated crypto layering. But the thing they could not hide was the fingerprint of the operation, the cash signature. Drug cash carried a distinct pattern: denominations, packaging, odor, residue that investigators were trained to recognize. When the same pattern began appearing in bank deposits across several states, federal agencies started comparing notes. By late 2022, analysts from DEA, HSI, FBI, and IRS-CI quietly pooled intelligence. What they saw stunned them: identical structuring patterns, identical shell company templates, identical phone numbers used by collectors in different cities, and deposits into accounts linked to Chen Wei's import-export business appeared in 4 unrelated drug investigations across 3 states. That was when investigators realized the truth. This wasn't a regional laundering service. It was a national pipeline feeding directly into a transnational financial system designed to move drug proceeds out of the United States with surgical precision. Agents intensified surveillance, quietly monitoring phones, vehicles, and bank accounts. They mapped movements from cash drop to cash out, from deposit to overseas value transfer. And then they saw it. The moment that confirmed they were dealing with a fully integrated nationwide laundering architecture. A collector in Chicago dropped off a cash load tied to fentanyl trafficking. Less than 12 hours later, the cartel's broker in Guadalajara received confirmation of equivalent funds delivered through a Chinese-connected pool overseas. The system worked flawlessly, and now federal agents knew exactly how big it was. The only question left was how to bring it down without letting millions more slip away. The collapse of the Chinese laundering network did not come from a dramatic shootout or a high-speed chase. It came from something far more ordinary: a confused bank teller in Houston staring at a deposit slip that made no sense. The depositor, a young man working as a kitchen helper, claimed the money belonged to his family wholesale business, but the account receiving the funds had no transaction history resembling commerce, only repeated cash deposits just under $10,000. The teller filed a routine internal alert. That alert triggered a review. The review triggered a suspicious activity report, and that report landed on the desk of an IRS CI analyst who had seen the same pattern in earlier fentanyl cases. Within days, federal agents obtained the young man's phone records, which connected him directly to a mid-level coordinator tied to Chen Wei. Surveillance began immediately. Agents tracked him to parking lots, strip malls, and back alley drop points, watching him pass envelopes to different couriers. The evidence grew quickly. A collector in Los Angeles was stopped during a nighttime traffic stop with $314,000 in vacuum-sealed bags hidden beneath a false floor panel. Another operative in Chicago attempted to flee during a bank interview and abandoned a backpack containing receipts, burner phones, and a handwritten ledger mapping cash pickups stretching across 3 states. Each mistake ripped open another layer of the organization. By early 2023, a joint task force composed of DEA, HSI, FBI, and IRS-CI had quietly mapped the core of the network: cash collectors, crypto handlers, shell company directors, and Chen Wei himself, who remained cautious but not cautious enough. Federal prosecutors secured sealed warrants and surveillance deepened. Agents watched Chen leave his small office in Alhambra, drive in predictable patterns to meet associates, enter casinos to exchange chips for smaller denominations, and use public Wi-Fi to access encrypted messaging apps. His downfall came from a single miscalculation. He attempted to transfer funds from one shell company to another, 2 accounts, both flagged in separate investigations, accidentally bridging cases that prosecutors had not yet connected. That link gave investigators the legal leverage they needed. The takedown was executed as a synchronized sweep. Before sunrise, teams moved in simultaneously across California, Texas, Nevada, Illinois, and New York. Apartment doors splintered under battering rams. Flashing lights filled quiet suburban streets. Agents in tactical gear seized cash counters, ledgers, duffel bags, and more than 40 phones, each containing fragments of the laundering network's communications. At Chen Wei's residence, he opened the door expecting a delivery. Instead, he was confronted with federal agents calling his name, ordering him to step outside. On his kitchen table, investigators found 2 notebooks, one containing coded transaction histories, the other listing dozens of collectors organized by city. In total, the government seized or froze tens of millions of dollars in drug proceeds, cash hidden in storage units, real estate acquired through shell companies, crypto wallets secured with backup seed phrases taped under desk drawers, and bank accounts used to funnel money into overseas pools. When the case finally reached court, the defendants pleaded guilty, admitting their roles in a laundering system that had quietly fueled America's drug epidemic. Prosecutors detailed how the network had moved proceeds from meth, cocaine, and fentanyl trafficking with a precision that could rival established cartel operations. But even as verdicts were read and sentences handed down, investigators emphasized one last, unsettling truth: millions of dollars remain unaccounted for. Somewhere outside the reach of U.S. jurisdiction, hidden in offshore banking pools, crypto cold wallets, or underground cash reserves, the final traces of the organization's profits disappeared without leaving a trail. And no one could say for sure whether those missing millions were gone forever or already fueling another network waiting to rise. As the dust settled and prosecutors closed their files, investigators were left with a troubling realization. The group they dismantled was not the entirety of the machine. It was merely one operational cell in a network that has become the preferred laundering engine for drug traffickers around the world. The Chinese money laundering model had evolved into something far beyond the reach of any single case. When analysts from DEA, HSI, and IRS-CI compared data from other investigations, they discovered nearly identical laundering signatures surfacing in cases involving fentanyl traffickers in Arizona, meth rings in the Midwest, cocaine distributors in New York, and even illegal gambling networks in California. Different crimes, different players, but the same laundering patterns, the same structuring amounts, the same shell company templates, and the same underground banking pools moving money between the United States, Mexico, China, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia. What became clear was that Chinese underground banking was not simply an alternative. It was becoming the dominant financial infrastructure underpinning major drug economies. Unlike cartels, who rely on risky bulk cash smuggling or corrupt remittance services, Chinese networks could move money faster, cheaper, and with fewer vulnerabilities. Street cash collected in Philadelphia could be matched to a pool in Shanghai. Money handed over by a cartel broker in Los Angeles could reappear as clean capital in Guadalajara within hours. No cross-border wires, no customs checkpoints, no bank compliance flags. Just an invisible exchange of value through a global ledger no government controlled. And the deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the connections became. In several cases, laundering patterns overlapped with networks tied to Southeast Asian scam compounds, underground casinos, and Chinese capital flight brokers who specialized in moving wealth for corrupt officials seeking to evade Beijing's oversight. The same brokers moving cartel money were also helping Chinese elites smuggle wealth overseas, helping online fraud syndicates settle cross-border debts, and helping organized crime groups invest in real estate through nominee buyers. It was a shadow financial system with thousands of customers and no headquarters. But the most elusive piece of the puzzle involved the missing millions. Federal agents traced some of the unaccounted funds into offshore crypto wallets, others into Hong Kong trading accounts, and a handful into real estate purchases made through third-party nominees. Yet a significant portion of the money simply vanished into the underground pools, absorbed by the opaque matching system where value can be reassigned endlessly without leaving a trail. Several financial intelligence experts now believe the untraceable funds may have been funneled back into China's grey market lending circuits or used to offset capital control evasion by wealthy clients, effectively blending cartel drug money with Chinese illicit finance. As one analyst put it, once it enters the pool, the money becomes unrecognizable, it loses its identity, it becomes part of a much larger river. And that river is still flowing. The collapse of Chenwei's cell disrupted one branch, but the broader architecture remains intact, adaptable, resilient, and constantly evolving. The unsettling truth behind this case is not how the organization fell, but how easily another one can rise in its place. Because if tens of millions in drug money can disappear into a global shadow bank without crossing a physical border, then the real question is not who laundered the money, but who is doing it right now, undetected. When the case finally closed, it was easy to look at the arrests, the guilty pleas, and the millions seized and call it a victory. But the truth is far more complicated. The story of Chen Wei and his network shows how crime can thrive in the spaces most people never think to look, in the deposits made at a neighborhood bank, in the shell companies registered in quiet suburbs, in the cash drops happening in parking lots after midnight. For years, drug money moved freely through a system built not with violence or intimidation, but with efficiency, patience, and a deep understanding of how to exploit the blind spots of modern finance. The people caught in this case were not the only ones doing it. They were simply the ones investigators reached first, and that leaves a question that echoes long after the courtroom lights fade. If a laundering pipeline this sophisticated could operate for years without detection, how many others are still running beneath the surface? How many millions are moving right now, between cities, across borders, through banking pools no government can fully see? This case reminds us that the fight against illicit finance is not a series of endings, but a series of interruptions. The system adapts, new players step in, the river keeps flowing. You've been watching Crisis Classified. Until the next case, stay aware.